Hey there, everybody. Oh, look, we have 7 thumbs up already. I love that. That lets me know. Thank you for liking before we even got started, because that definitely lets me know that there are people out there. And as I always like to say, it's weird to talk into a camera lens without the sense that there's somebody on the other end of it, but it's so much more pleasant. I do love it when you drop me a comment in the comments, in the chat, in the live chat. Because then I really know that you're there. So why don't you all drop me drop me a little comment in the live chat. Tell me who you are and how you're doing, and maybe even sort of what you're interested in terms of interior design. And if you're watching this on the replay after the fact, do the same in the regular comments down below. All right. Oh, hi there. E-Wolf says hello. Nice to see you. I'm so glad that you're just tuning in. Wonderful. Welcome. Today I'm going to be talking about interior design and what I'm calling neurodivergent interior design. Hi, Bug. Nice to see you. Or neurodivergent interior design, or just divergent interior design. I haven't really settled on a nomenclature for it yet, and maybe we don't even need to settle on anything. But I've done a previous live stream about interior design, and I'm not going to expand terribly much on that. And in fact, I'm just going to sort of zero in on a few basic principles that I maybe talked about in that previous live stream. But with specific examples from my own home. And I've spent the whole morning trying to figure out how to do that from a technical perspective, to show you photographs. I don't know how to show you video yet, and I think that I may eventually make a pre-recorded video, sort of a little tour of some parts of my home, and talk about neurodivergent interior design from that perspective. But today we're going to get still images, and I do think that I have figured it all out, but you'll have to forgive me if there are any technical glitches. Reagan C says, hi, I watched some of your older streams, but this is my first time attending live. So great. I hope I said your name right. Regan or Reagan, I'm not sure, but it's so great to have you here. Thank you for watching previous streams, and yeah, photos are good enough. Well, photos are what we're gonna get today. Hopefully, knock on wood, that it's all gonna work out. But I think I've got it figured out. So I want to start with just a little bit of sort of what I'm thinking from a kind of theoretical perspective. I've been doing a lot of reading into disability theory lately, and critical disability studies, and I'm really excited about it, about what I'm learning. And one of the concepts that I encountered recently while I was reading a book, I think I have it. I've talked about this book a lot on my stream before, What Can a Body Do by Sarah Hendren, and the subtitle I can never remember, but it's called How We Meet the Built World. Just a fantastic, fantastic book about two of my passions, disability and design, sort of coming together. And in this book, I was introduced to the concept of deaf space, which is basically like architecture and interior design, specifically for the needs of deaf people, and it's something that's been especially prevalent, obviously, at Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., which is the first and probably most prominent deaf university. And I've never visited Gallaudet, although I'm very eager to now. But I do have a sort of long history of being interested in deaf issues. When a lifetime ago, going on probably over 30 years ago now, I went to law school, and when I was in law school, one of my classmates was deaf, and because you you follow the same. You're in a cohort in your first year, and you take all your classes together. That meant that every one of my classes in my first year of law school was sign language interpreted, which was just fantastic. And I became friends with this student, and kind of developed a special interest in deaf issues. When I look back, I realize that that was sort of my entree into disability studies, although I didn't really um, get passionate about it, quite selfishly, until later, much later, when I started to identify myself as disabled. But anyway, I did learn a little bit of sign language, and I did a ton of reading about the history of deafness and deaf culture. Um, and so I was especially intrigued to learn a little bit about deaf space as a concept. And I'm going to show you um, a couple of images. Something happened here. Just as a brief introduction, and I guess that what I should say is that this idea of deaf space is really fairly new to me, and I haven't really dug into it yet, and I'm very excited to. So it's only like the sort of the very beginning of me thinking about this as a kind of theoretical foundation for neurodivergent space. But I do think that it's there, and I think that it's interesting and that I'm onto something. So let me just give you a couple of examples. These are just screen grabs that I took from images on the internet, and I'm hoping that there aren't any like um, copyright violation issues. But anyway, this is an example of a space at Gallaudet University, and it was one of the first buildings. I watched a little documentary this morning, like a 10-minute little documentary about deaf space, and an interview with the architect who designed this space and who has designed a lot of space at Gallaudet. And he talked about, it was interesting, he was very much talking about the design process um, and how they made a lot of mistakes in this first iteration of their attempts to make space that was accommodating to deafness. But here what you see, and what's especially interesting to me, is this seating arrangement, the circular wooden seating arrangement that is specifically designed to accommodate people um, whose speech is visual, right? Like sign language is something that you need to be able to see. Well, at least obviously there's deaf blind people as well, but I'm speaking specifically about sighted deaf people who speak, in this instance, at Gallaudet, American Sign Language. And so you need to have seating where people can see each other, where the sight lines are always clear. And then the other thing that was really interesting that I read, I think that I read it in the Sarah Hendren book, is that the reason that the seating is all wood is because we think um, of deaf people as not having access to sound, but that's not actually true, because deaf people can access sound through vibration, and wood is a very good conductor of vibration. And so the the seating is not only circular to accommodate sight lines, but it also allows for access to sound. And from what I understand, often if you're in deaf spaces, there will actually be a, a boombox playing really loudly, I mean, loudly to hearing people, to create those vibrations. So it's super interesting to me. What he said about what he said about some of the mistakes that they made were how big the space is. You see those huge glass windows in the background, and the huge high ceilings. And he said it's beautiful in terms of letting light in, and that was part of their idea, um, was to create lots of light, and also to sort of break down the interior exterior divide so that people could literally communicate like from the inside to the outside through sign language. But he said um, the problem with this, between the size of the space and the materials that they used, the acoustics aren't very good. And you would think, again, that acoustics isn't really an issue for deaf people, but apparently for deaf people who have cochlear implants, or hearing, or hard of hearing people who have hearing aids, it's just really the acoustics make it very difficult to use those assistive devices. So he said that if they were to do it again, they would do it differently. But this was sort of a first stab at it. And another thing in this space is that there's the elevator that takes you up and down the floors is also enclosed with glass, so that you could literally have conversations from outside the elevator with somebody inside the elevator. And I just thought that that was kind of cool. A couple more really quick examples of deaf space. Here's another image. And again, you might think, oh, this is just like a really cool on-trend open concept space. And, open concept is kind of on trend right now and has been for quite a while. But the reason for the open concept is not because it's trendy, but because, again, you need to have those clear sight lines for people who speak with their hands. So I thought that was a cool example. And then finally, can I do this? I think I have to, sorry. Finally, this one was really interesting to me. Again, the classrooms have to keep the sight lines open so that, you can't have rows and rows of people because the people in the front wouldn't be able to see the people in the back when the students in the front wouldn't be able to see the students in the back when they're speaking. So instead, you have classrooms that are designed in these arcs or semicircles. But in this video that I watched this morning, where they were interviewing the architect, he was talking about how even sort of the angle of the arc becomes important, because if it's too deep, the professor might walk into it, and then the people who I'm going to turn this off. Then the people who are behind her, like if you've got a really deep U shape, if the professor is in here, the people back here on the sides wouldn't be able to see or hear what the professor was saying. So those were just a couple of quick examples that were just really illuminating to me about how interior design can be accommodating in unexpected ways that I think we can translate over to neurodivergence. Obviously, the issues that confront neurodivergent people in terms of our spaces are very different than the issues that confront deaf people. But just conceptually, it's really interesting to me to think about interior design in that kind of a way. And what I'm going to do today is not even getting into that yet. Like, I would love, and think that we will have to do a workshop soon where we put our heads together and really come up with some principles about what are the kinds of accommodation needs specifically that we need as neurodivergent people. But today what I want to do is just sort of give permission to think beyond kind of convention and trends, because I think that often when we think about interior design, what we think about are, how do we make it pretty, right? Or how do we make it acceptable? How do we make it fit the expectations of what our space is going to look like? Certainly, if you go on YouTube and visit interior design channels, which I do all the time, I will admit, most of what you're going to see is like, what is mid-century modern, and what is boho, and what is Japandi, and like all of these different sorts of trends of interior design, sort of aesthetic trends. And don't get me wrong, I'm all about aesthetics, and I do think that actually aesthetics is a big piece of what we need to think about in terms of neurodivergent design, because I do think that like beauty matters, and whatever our sense of beauty is matters, and that tending to that is super important. But today what I want to talk about is permission to sort of buck the trends, permission to use our spaces in really weird and unconventional ways. And I think that we have to do that before we can even start digging into like how we might design the spaces on a more kind of granular level to meet our neurodivergent needs. And so today what I wanted to do is just sort of tell a story of kind of um, the the journey that I've been on in my downstairs space as I've tried to at first just make it kind of presentable and use the spaces in the ways that I thought I was supposed to use them, and then realize that that wasn't working, and then reconfigure it all. So I'm going to show you some before and some after pictures of my downstairs space. But even before I get to that, I wanted to just give a couple of quick examples of what I'm talking about using our spaces in the ways that make sense to us and not in the ways that, you know, the interior design industry and the real estate industry would have us use it. So I am noticing that there's some comments, and that's wonderful. And I love to have comments. And if you do have any questions or comments or thoughts of your own, please feel free to put them in the chat box. I'm going to ignore them for the time being because it's really hard for me to keep my train of thought, stay on top of the tech end of this, which is like, I think that for other people is not really an issue, but even for me, just making sure that I click the right buttons to make the pictures appear feels a little daunting. But I will come back to the chat. Okay, so feel free to fill it up, and then I'll come back to it, and we can have conversations, and I can answer your questions. Okay, so what I wanted to do is just, without any photos, because I didn't have time to dig up photos, is just give you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about. And one is from a comment that somebody made once on an interior design post that I made on Instagram. And I don't remember who this person was at all. If you're here, let me know if it was you. Or if you come and watch this later, please do drop a comment and let me know it was you. But basically, the person was sort of bemoaning how difficult it was to keep her home tidy. She was somebody who had children and a partner, and in particular, she was complaining about not complaining. Complaining, but in a constructive way, in a completely legitimate and constructive way, trying to express her frustration about laundry, which is something that is the bane of many of our existence, right? And she was saying, you know, like, I set up these systems that I think might work for me, but my family won't like pay attention to the systems that I've set up. And is it so much to ask for them just to put their clothes in the hamper in the bathroom? And she was like, instead, they're like changing their clothes all over the house and dumping their dirty clothes everywhere. And I said, well, how about you just have hampers in all the rooms? And then when you're ready to do the laundry, it's just a matter of going around and collecting the clothes from the hampers in all the rooms. But at least then it's like confined to a hamper and not all over the floor and the furniture and all the rest of it. And she was like, what? I can have dirty clothes hampers in all the rooms in my house? I was like, yes, you can. You can do whatever you want, right? Like, again, like we have this idea that the dirty clothes hamper has to go in either the bathroom or the laundry room or the bedroom, right? But you can't have a dirty clothes hamper in your dining room or in your kitchen or in your living room. But if those are the spaces where your family is consistently taking off their dirty clothes, then why not, right? Similarly, someone had this revelation that she had a playroom in the basement, and she had a dining room near her kitchen. And when she was in the kitchen, she couldn't see her kids because the playroom was in the basement, but they never used the dining room. And so the table always got piled high with crap. And she was like, I could just switch them. Like, we rarely use the dining room table, so why not put that in the playroom in the basement for the odd event when we actually sit down to a big meal, and instead put the playroom where the dining room table was so I can see my kids while I'm cooking. I mean, those are just a couple of examples. The final one that I will give is, I think that it's just a strange phenomenon, but I think it's a strange phenomenon that is related to the ways that we see children and the importance of children, or the lack of importance of children in designing our spaces, is that we always think of the master bedroom, the largest bedroom with usually the ensuite, right, as being for the parents, even though the parents spend almost no time in their bedroom and have most of their sorts of hobbies and needs for space usually are in an office or in a basement or a garage, whereas children actually, like, that is their space. That is not just their sleeping space, but their living space and their playing space. Like, why don't we put our children in the master bedroom and put our own beds in, like, the tiniest, smallest little room that we can possibly fit it in? Like, that's what we've done in our home, because we don't need a huge bedroom. We need, we both work from home. We need office space and sitting space. So those are just a couple of examples of what I'm talking about giving yourself permission to use your space in ways that make sense for you and your family, and not for the ways that the like HGTV channels will tell you should, or the real estate marketing will tell you should, or the interior design channels on Instagram and YouTube will tell you should. You should design for you and yourself and your family's needs. So so I'm going to talk now. I'm going to start taking you through a little tour of my own space. This is a home that we bought 4 years ago. In fact, we closed on it 4 years ago on Saturday. And the reason that I remember that is because it's my daughter's birthday. And we closed on her 21st birthday, and she's about to turn 25. So it's been a long journey in this house. And for those of you who may not know this, I had just a few years before then left a long-term marriage and the family home that I had raised my children in, and I'd lived in a series of apartments, and this was finally, I had finally been able to buy a new home. So it was a kind of period of a lot of transition, and I had a lot of ideas about how I wanted to use my space and how I wanted to fill my space that were really based on how I had lived my life previously in the marriage that I left, because that life wasn't working for me. So I don't know why I was like so superimposing that whole life onto my fantasies for the future. But I really had filled myself with these fantasies about a space that would be full of people and lots of socializing and big meals around big tables and puppy piles of kids on deep, cozy sofas. I'll show you all this. So when I left that marriage, I didn't take anything with me other than like the clothes on my back and some books. So I had to buy all new furniture and all sorts of stuff, and ended up buying stuff that was not really what I needed and was not really practical to the lifestyle that I have since settled into, let us say. Okay, so the space in my downstairs is one huge open space, and then there's a little addition on the back of the house in which there's the kitchen and a downstairs bathroom. That the kitchen was obviously at one point in the downstairs space before the addition was built. But when we bought the house actually from a community church that had met in that space, and it really is sort of amenable to that kind of like big kind of performance space almost. And I'm going to show you. I don't have any photos still of when we first moved in and what it looked like when it was completely empty. But I'm going to show you the layout that I made. I like to do layouts on graph paper and then cut out the furniture and so that I can sort of, whoops, sorry, I didn't mean to turn that off, so that I can sort of move it around, because otherwise it's really hard for me to imagine what will actually fit where. But as you can see, I don't know if you can see this cursor, but over here in the bottom right-hand corner is the front door, walking into this big, huge space. And the space is 40 feet long by almost 15 feet wide. And it's just open, 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 open. And then up here in the upper left-hand corner, there's a door into that kitchen addition. So it's a huge space, and it was kind of a conundrum because I didn't really know what to do with it. And let's see. So a couple of efforts that I made. Well, this was what I settled on in the very first iteration of using this space. I made this middle space, as you can see up here in the I'm going to go back to the layout. You can see that there on the bottom wall, there's stairs that make a sort of, so there's a big open space at the front of the house and then a narrower space in the middle because of the stairs, and then it opens up again in the back before you go into the kitchen. So here you can see the stairs over there on the, I get really turned around. It's on my left, but I don't know if it's on your left or not. But anyway, on the side by the table there. So I decided, because it was so weird and narrow, to put the dining room in that middle area because I couldn't figure out what else to do with it. And in the back, I created a kind of what you might call a family room. The TV was back there, and it was kind of like where we actually spent time. But before even that, I want to show you how before that, I had this huge IKEA table that I had bought when I first left my marriage, with this idea that I was going to like host all of these big events, and we're going to have, large numbers of people around the table. I had all of these kinds of images in my mind. And so I bought this huge table, and this is it at the very back. So if you can imagine, way back there where the couches are, that table. And then here's another attempt to figure out how to use that table. I have it sticking out from the wall with the stairs. And then yet another attempt to figure out how to use that table pushed up against that wall. But it was just so big. And the truth of the matter is that we don't entertain large numbers of people around a dining room table, even though that's kind of a fantasy of mine, right? But it turns out that I don't really enjoy that. Like, it's really hard for me to do it, and it's not something that I'm ever going to be doing on a really regular basis, entertaining large numbers of people around a dining room table. So I finally settled. I got rid of the huge dining room table, and instead bought this table and chairs for like $80 on Facebook Marketplace, and then painted them. We were so poor at this point that all of the paint is like paint you can pick up at paint stores on the return shelf for like $5 or $10 a gallon. So that's why all the weird colors. It was just what I had. Yeah. So and then the other piece of the dining room was that my son lived with me at this time, and our house was sort of like young, like the safe space almost, where all of his friends spent all of their time. They had the basement, and they were all. This was before they could drive. They were all avid bicyclists, and they got around everywhere on their bikes. So I also had this bike rack in that sort of weird little in between area, and it was always full of bikes. Uh, which is actually a time that I hark back to with enormous fondness. It was a time when I would get up early in the morning and come downstairs, and I could know how many kids were in the basement based on how many bikes were in my living room. But anyway, we had that bike rack, and then in the back there, near the in the very back, this was the furniture that I had bought when I left my marriage. Again, like I look at that now and I'm just like, what was I thinking? Beige? Like I hate beige, and it gets so dirty. And it's also next to, like, I actually love the size and shape of this furniture. Um, but here's another picture of it for my husband, Joel, who you can see sitting there in that love seat. He has a bad back, and it was just a nightmare for him. He could barely, like, it was so hard for him to get in and out of that furniture. Like I sit all curled up, like with my legs underneath me or laying down, leaning up against a pillow. Like that's just how I like to be on furniture, but it was a nightmare for him. And so anyway, I don't know what I was thinking, but that's what we had. So I covered up some of it with some really cheap fabric I got at the fabric store. But the idea was that the dining room was in the middle, and this sort of, I think that, like, this is a phenomenon, right? This is a phenomenon that is what I am talking about, that many people sort of the traditional suburban home, right? There's a living room, which is where you entertain people and you keep it really nice and you have the nice furniture in there. And then there's a family room or a den, right? That has the TV in it and has the toys in it and is where the family actually lives. And that's a perfect example of, like, why have a living room just for the sake of being presentable when a few people come to visit? And I don't, it maybe isn't just an American phenomenon, because it really, I really noticed it when I was watching this great show on Irish architecture called Room to Improve, I highly recommend it if you like architecture and you like these makeover shows, with the Irish architect Dermot Bannon. And apparently in Ireland, they would call it the good room, right? I think that often it gets called sort of the parlor. But it's basically a room that nobody uses, but is there at the front of the house to be presentable. And so I had my sort of family room there in the back that we actually used because that's where the TV was. It was next to the kitchen. And then I didn't know what to do with the whole huge area at the front of the house. So, sort of inexplicably, I made a good room. I made a parlor. I'm going to show it to you. So here it was. This was what you walked into immediately when you walked into the house. On the side, yeah. And I have to admit that I loved this room. Like I thought it was, and I do. I look at it now and I kind of feel a little pang because it was so pretty. I just, like, it was so pretty. And it was such a, like, if somebody came to the door, this is what they saw. And I felt so proud of it. Like I made that room for like $100 because, again, we were so poor. And I got those red chairs on Facebook Marketplace and that coffee table. And we literally never sat in it, ever. I think I had this idea again that people would come over and that we would sit in it, but nobody ever came over. Um, and to be honest, there was also the complication of that fairly quickly after this space got created, um, the pandemic happened. So even if we might have had people over, we couldn't have. But it's a pretty space. I mean, it might not be to your taste, but to me, this is a really lovely space. I feel really proud of it. I worked really hard at it. Um, and it was it was kind of pointless. I especially loved this wall, this gallery wall that I created that is mostly my children's artwork. And I do have to say that I'm a huge fan of framing your kids' art. If you have children and they come home with art from their school, put it in frames and put it on your walls because it's really great. But anyway, so I'm glad that I have these pictures to remind me of it, um, but while I had this beautiful parlor that maybe wasn't sort of on trend according to, the HGTV or the YouTube interior design trends, because that stuff I've never really paid that much attention to, especially since it's like gray and beige is always on trend. We go from the cool neutrals of gray and black and white to the warm neutrals of beige and say, I don't know, I don't get it. I don't understand why everybody's so into these bland neutrals. But anyway, that wasn't what I was into. But so it wasn't so much that I was following trends, but I was definitely feeling like I needed to follow the convention of having a parlor in the front of my house that you walked into immediately. And I created that, and we never sat in it. And then, um, at the same time, you could hear me moaning and complaining all the time about how I didn't have any space to make art in. Um, and So I have this study that we're in now, which was originally an art studio, but sort of quickly became more of a study and office space. I still call it my studio, but it's really an office. And then my husband got a work from home job, so he needed an office space. So we moved our bedroom from the biggest room in the house upstairs to the smallest room in the house upstairs. And now his study is uh, in the front room, in the master bedroom. And there's also those red chairs are up there now too, so that I can come and sit with him while he's working. Um, but I didn't have a place to like really make art, and certainly not like um, painting. And I was especially thinking about maybe rehabbing furniture. And I was like imagining like how could I find a co-working space, or could we ever possibly afford for me to get a studio outside the home? But that seemed like a lot of money, and then I wondered if I would actually go to it because I'm such a homebody. So anyway, finally it occurred to me that I I have this huge space that's full of sunlight in the front of my house that could be an art studio, right? And instead of being a parlor. So that's what I finally decided to do. Um, I'm going to show you now. This is basically what it looks like now. This is from the stairs, so you're looking at it a little bit down. But that is what used to be this, right? So a slightly different angle, but not much. So now it's my art studio. Um, and I'm going to take you through a couple of other decisions that I made, but basically this is this is that space now, and I love it so much, um, and I love its possibilities so much. Here we are a little bit closer. I got a different dining room table, which I'm going to talk to you a little bit about in a minute, and some new furniture. These were all hand-me-downs from my mother-in-law. So what I decided to do was to use that old dining room table that I had bought for almost nothing on Facebook Marketplace and had painted. with the lavender and black stripes from the from the returns shelf. That lavender that you see everywhere was such a great find because it was not just a cheap return, but it was a high gloss lavender. Like it was a really high quality paint. So I just put it everywhere, like on the door, um, on the woodwork, and I painted the table with it. Anyway, let's see if I can take you even a little closer. So here's a photo of the desk setup where I can make art, which is so exciting. And right now what you see is my easel with just a piece of cardboard because I'm not really ready to commit to expensive substrates, I guess you call it. Uh, and I'm going to start painting on cardboard because that's really what I can afford. And I want to get away from feeling like anything that I make is precious. Like I need to just get over that so that I'm not being such a perfectionist. But what I also want to show you in this picture is how kind of messy the shelves are over there, right? Like it's not like I could probably, let's see if I can find another one. Here's another one. Yeah. I'm going to go back to the, one from the stairs because you can see over there there's a whole bunch of shelves over there and the cubbies too, and maybe someday I will get around to being super organized about my art supplies and my tool, like that's where all of my art supplies, all of my tools are there. A bunch of sort of random stuff that isn't what you, it's the stuff that you would totally find in an art studio, but it's not the stuff that you find when you walk into the front room of a middle-aged, middle-class person, right? But I just decided I don't care. It works for me. And the cubbies especially I put there because I did want to create a tiny bit of separation between the art studio and the rest of the space, just a little bit of a sense of separation, but I still wanted it to be open. I think I have another photo. Let me see. Yeah. Here's sort of a close-up photo of the cubbies looking back. Not like, I guess if I were getting ready for like a magazine photo shoot, I would really worry about styling these really nicely. And I do like that. Like I do like pretty surfaces and displays of objects that are aesthetically pleasing and pretty. But the truth is that that's not really how I live. And so I didn't style it up for you. I just wanted these are pretty much photos that I took a couple of days ago without very much cleaning up ahead of time, just to show you um, sort of how I live, right? So that's the art studio. Let me see if there's any other. Oh, this is the looking back from the desk. And I'm going to talk about the furniture in just a minute, and in a little while I'll talk about that mural. But this is just sort of a view looking back. And straight through, you can even see the little arched opening to the kitchen, right? I also want to show you, so I said that I got these great, I got this new furniture from my mother-in-law who was downsizing from a really big house to a much smaller apartment in a retirement community. And she said, "Do you want these couches and this table?" And I was like, "Oh my God, it's," and the funny thing is that it's actually on trend right now. Like it's sort of postmodern design, and it is actually kind of a throwback to the 80s, and it really is in sort of retro on trend right now. Um, but I wouldn't have taken it from her if it was only because it was on trend. I just happen to love this style, and it just happens to be on trend right now. But anyway, I'm going to show you the dining room if I can. So the table is round, which I just love, and it came with the rug. which is fantastic. And it came with the chairs, which I think are a little hint of kind of mid-century modern. And the roundness of the table really makes it fit in this weird dining room space so much better. You can see that I absolutely did not clean up for you guys, right? Like there's toilet paper rolls on the table. And and the truth is that we rarely actually eat at the table. We only do when my daughter comes over to eat, or on the very few occasions. Sometimes we do, but rarely. And I'll show you why. It's because we got TV trays, which we love, but are also, truth be told, the reason that we don't eat at the dining room table. But it's there, and it's not so much in the way, and I kind of love it. And 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 the rest of the room still becomes sort of a dumping ground. As you can see over there is a ceiling fan that we were going to put in the kitchen, but it didn't really work in the kitchen, so we're going to replace the ceiling fan in our bedroom, which makes a lot of noise, so we end up not using it, with this nice new sleek ceiling fan, but it hasn't even made its way up the steps yet. It's right there at the bottom of the steps. Yeah, the tablecloth, that also came from my mother-in-law. She has great taste, I have to say. um, but I also want to show you how I really am using this space in ways that suit me. So this is, you can, oh, sorry. You see those shelves in front of that window? That's going to be where that is where I'm starting my seeds. And like it's in my living room. I mean, it's in my dining room. Like it's an old metal shelf in my dining room, but like that's the space that I have to start my seeds for my garden in. And I should have taken a picture of the mess that's around that corner, like the the huge window air conditioner unit that keeps this whole space cool in the summer. Theoretically, goes into a closet that's in the back of the space, but that closet is now full of other stuff, and I kept not taking the air conditioner out because I didn't have a place to put it. So I just shoved it around the corner there, and it's just sort of hanging out almost like a side table to the couch in the studio. But let's go now to, I'll show you the before and then the after. So this is the space as it used to be, and you can see that black wall. That was another idea that I had that didn't really pan out. It's a chalkboard wall, and I had this image. Again, I had all these fantasies about how my house was going to be full of people and parties and salons and meals, and that people were going to make art on this big blackboard wall, and nobody ever did, so that got painted. But this space has now been renovated into, let's see, this space, and you can see this like curvy teal couch that I inherited from my mother-in-law, and the rug came from her as well. The hutch is on the what used to be that blackboard wall is a trash pick. That I hope to eventually sort of upcycle and put some interesting paint on. And there are two of those teal couches, and they really are meant to be a set facing each other. And I originally had them as a set facing each other, and had that old beige couch in the studio. But the problem was that it wasn't really good for both me and Joel to sit on, the teal couches, or certainly not to cuddle on. And I decided that cuddling was more important than than having the couches where they should be and to match. So I instead moved that old beige couch to where I sit. I can show you. Here's that space from the kitchen door, basically. Now we're looking forward. And here is sort of the space from the view from me This is where I'm often sitting in that corner of that couch. You can see the TV over there. This is where we sit and watch TV. You can see the new TV trays, which we just love. And we got rid of, there used to be an ottoman between these and it was like cumbersome. And the TV trays are so movable. And so I use them for my books and if I'm drawing, I can have my art supplies there, but we also do eat from them while we're watching TV most of the time. But anyway, this couch, eventually I have the idea that I'm going to learn how to reupholster it, and I even have the fabric for it, and I'm kind of excited about it. But in the meantime, let's see if I can take us back to this one. Yeah, so in the meantime, there it sits. I do have I guess a bedspread over part of it so that it's not quite so beige and ugly. But anyway, that's the living room now, and it really, yeah, it is. There are windows everywhere. There are 4 windows in that, 4, 1, 2, 5 windows in this space. Now, these windows on the side, with these pink curtains that I just recently put up, that I had bought like years ago and just finally put up, look out, like there's like just a tiny little alley between us and the house next to us. So it's not like there's any nice sort of view, but they are south facing windows, and there's just, and it just streams with sunlight. So let's see. So that was, I'm gonna take us, I'm gonna just look at you now, take the photos down, and go look at some comments, and then I'm gonna and we can have a conversation, and then I might talk to you a little bit about that mural. So let's see. I'm gonna go way back. You guys have been chatting away in here. This is fantastic. Okay, so some of you early on were saying that you're excited to hear about deaf space and the examples from deaf space, and I'm pretty sure that this was still, E. Wolf is saying, yes, I want to be a part of that conversation. I think that comment came in when I was talking about having a conversation that would sort of take the ideas and principles and theories of deaf space and transpose them, or see what could emerge from a concept of neurodivergent space. And I definitely want to run a workshop about that, and would probably be doing that, at least in the first instance, in the Divergent Design Studios community, which you can join. We would love to have you join, all of you. And I think if there isn't a link in the description, I will put one. But I think you can just go to divergentdesignstudios.com and you'll find the information about how to join that community. We do have in Divergent Design Studios on Mighty Networks, we have what we call a lab, which is sort of a separate little space that you can join for free. It's all inclusive. That's specifically about interior and garden design, and we have a bi-weekly support group that meets to talk about design, interior and garden design issues, and it's a great little community, I have to say. I love it. Laura Los Tacos is here from Germany. Fantastic. Great to see you, Laura. Reagan, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm probably saying it wrong no matter what I do, says a more practical and need accommodating interior design show on HTV would have totally rocked the landscape of what the layperson thinks about designing their homes. Yeah, I agree. And there's another comment here. Closest thing to that was a handful of extreme makeover home edition episodes where a family member had a special need or disease, so they built the space to accommodate that. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've seen some of those, and they're often just sort of these kind of feel good, like, oh, look at how we're making this space work for this poor, tragic, disabled person. but it's always framed as sort of like an exception and kind of exceptional, and like it's supposed to be heartwarming because the family is going out of their way and the designers are going out of their way. And I would kind of just want to normalize it all a little bit more. That like my whole theory of neurodivergence is that it's not really a disorder, that it's a difference, that becomes pathologized and becomes disabling because we live in a world that isn't designed for us. But we can design it differently, and we can make it be less disabling in all of those ways. Yeah. Um, yeah, I'm actually hoping to interview a few interior designers. There are a couple of people who I follow and who I might have some like the ability to contact, um, who aren't people who think specifically about disability or about neurodivergence, as far as I know. But I think that, but they are designers and they're good designers, and I think it would be kind of interesting to pick their brains about, like, ask them to think in these ways and see what they come up with. So that's one of the things that I'm looking forward to soon, I hope, on this channel, is to start interviewing people. And I have a few interior design folks in mind specifically. Um, Laura Loves Tacos says, thinking outside the box is so great with these things, helped me in a lot of different ways, especially with cleaning and housework. Yeah, I do think that, like, the that when we have a consistent problem in our space, what usually happens is that we just feel defeated by it, and then we sort of internalize that as like there's something wrong with us. And I'm not saying that we don't have impairments that make life hard, including life in our spaces, but I think that we can often reframe it as, maybe there isn't something wrong with us. Maybe there's something wrong with the way the space is designed, and how can we think like that? And if we come at it from that perspective, at least it isn't like shameful, and we don't have to internalize all those bad feelings. Um, and we can just think of it as an iterative design process. I mean, that's part of the reason that I wanted to show you the progression of my downstairs, because I wasn't thinking that way when we first moved here. I was thinking about how to make this be kind of as close as I was ever going to get to a kind of presentable, middle-aged, middle-class home. I mean, not that that really matters to me, but looking back, I'm realizing that I was interested in having a space that I could invite people into that wasn't going to highlight how weird I am, right? Um, and that I went through so many iterations to get to a space that feels like it really works for us now, and that will. This is another thing about interior design, I think, is that we are not static people. We are changing all the time. Our interests change, our passions change, our capacities change, our needs change, our family configurations change. And so, um, our spaces are going to have to change. And this notion that we should, like, get it all fixed and figure it all out once and for all and then never need to change it again, I think is also part of the problem. So yeah, lots of ways that we need to think about. Yes, this sums it up. Learning to do things that help you, no matter if guests give you weird looks, right? And who has guests anymore? Do people have guests anymore? I don't know. I mean, I am kind of looking forward. I'm hoping that we might someday have a few people over, but it's been such a long time. Um, Sam's Skills says, dining tables are overrated in my opinion. Coffee table, living room tables are the dining tables. I love hosting too, but something more intimate is better to me. I could not agree with you more. Um, and, even though I do still have a dining room table, most of the time it just ends up being a dumping ground, and it's kind of a problem. And maybe eventually we'll get rid of it. Although I like aesthetically, I really like it because it's round. um, And I do imagine that someday we will entertain a little bit more than we have been able to in the last couple of years. But yes, I totally agree. Like I don't even like sitting in dining room table chairs. I find them incredibly uncomfortable. I much prefer to be curled up with my legs underneath me on the corner, in the corner of a couch with my plate on my lap. Even if we're not watching TV, that's still how I prefer to eat. It's just super uncomfortable for me to sit at a dining room table chair. Um, and I have advised people who have consulted with me about it to just feel free to get rid of your dining room table and to feel free to use it if to use your dining room in a completely different way, like that woman who decided to make her dining room into a into a playroom. I'm just like such a big fan of that. Um, Broomhead says, I tried doing the nice, clean living room for entertaining, and everyone just ends up in the dining room under the kitchen. Anyway, it's really true. So the living room is now our TV room, right? Like that's the other piece of this is that even if I had kept that pretty parlor at the front and had big events, social events, everybody would be piled into my tiny little kitchen. That's my experience. Is that nobody uses even when theoretically it would make sense to use those sort of good rooms or parlors. Nobody does. Absolutely. Uh, Laura Loves Taco says, I don't know if I'm imagining it, but I think you can even see the difference between the rooms in terms of being used. Yeah, I definitely would say that that we now use all of the spaces in ways that feel good, um, and in ways that we didn't before. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, what's the point of designing so much of your space for guests when they don't live here? I even feel that way about guest. We don't actually have a guest room, um, partly because who has guests in the pandemic, and partly because um, the main people who would come and stay with us are my daughter who lives right here, and my son who still lives at home and has the basement. So we don't really have guests. Uh, But even if we did, I think at most we would have like a day bed in a room that we otherwise use. Like has always struck me as strange to devote a whole room in a house to the occasional guest. Like why not get like either a Murphy bed or a day bed, or IKEA has some, good like multi use kinds of pull out beds and couches, so that at least you're using that space for something that's real and ongoing in your own life, and you can just convert it to a guest room on the very few occasions. I mean, maybe some people have guests so frequently that it makes sense to devote a whole room to it, but it's always struck me as a little bit strange. um, Regan says again, love your home, Marta. It inspires creativity. Thank you so much. I'm happy with it now. I mean, there's always, I mean, I didn't show you the bathrooms. um, and there's always ways that I want to keep noodling with it, but I'm really happy with it right now. Um, uh, Yamuna says, oh my God, I painted my wall that exact green and another wall turquoise blue, and I feel alive and so happy. These are just colors. I mean, I said early on that aesthetics do matter, but I feel like that should be like the last piece of how you think about designing your space, not the first piece. You know, like the first piece should be, how am I going to actually use this space, and how am I going to solve the problems that I have in using space, um, and then how am I going to make sure that it's beautiful according to my sense of beauty, so that I actually want to be in the space and it makes me feel alive. But yes, um, yeah, Muna, I am a big fan of the green and the turquoise. Big fan. Uh, and Spiral Nerd, who I know as Bug, says, I love that lavender. I had a great grandma. By the time she was in her 70s to 90s, everything in her house was purple, except for her two goldfish named Purr and Pull. That's fantastic. Yeah, I do think that there's an element to getting, like, I do think that some people, as they get older, they get more conservative. But I think that if you're sort of, in general, somebody who is living an unconventional life um, and who doesn't care so much about convention, that one of the lovely things about getting older is that you just care less. If you can hold on to that, you know, you just care less and less and less, and you feel more and more freedom to do whatever you want. Um, Broomhead says, I love the painted wall and the lights. Your home is beautiful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I am going to go talk about that mural in just a second. Um, Kathleen says, a fellow gingham top jam jar saver. uh, I don't know if you've ever. I talk a fair amount about my breakfast ritual, which is 2 pieces of toast, one with Smucker's organic natural peanut butter, and the other is that brand. I can't remember what the name of the brand is, but it has that gingham top, and I like the cherry. So that's and I go through about one of those a week. And it's so hard for me to throw them away because they're such a great little size. And when we were really poor, we just drank out of jam jars and pickle jars and salsa jars. And we still have quite a few of those. But now I feel compelled to save them because I do feel certain that I will use them in some way. Eventually, I'm probably going to have to start recycling some of them. Um, uh, let's see. Lots of lovely comments, just complimenting my space, and I really do appreciate that. Um, Regan says, "Yeah, we had a big blackboard wall on our work once. People used it less and less as time went on." Yeah, I just had this. I had a lot of fantasies about how my space was gonna be used, and I don't feel bad about the fact that they didn't work out. I just feel like that's part of the whole iterative process, that you just sort of learn as you go, you know, and that things change. Um, uh, Narty Gumball says, oops, message. I meant to say I was sad my alerts didn't work and I joined late today. I'll catch up. Yeah, absolutely. This will be available as just a regular video, and feel free to uh, watch that. And I would love it if you would comment. I don't know if you guys know this about YouTube and about the sort of way that channels grow on YouTube, but if you do, if you know, if there's a content creator that you like, including me, one of the ways that you can help their channel grow is by liking the videos and leaving comments and obviously subscribing to their channels. And so um, um, I'm just looking through. There's a lot of great comments here. I think that because we're starting to run out of time, um, so many great comments here. Uh, but I think that um, I want to jump over to talking about this mural before I say goodbye to you. Um, so let's see. This is this is the second teal couch, right? I told you that I got a set of teal couches from my mother-in-law, and they're just fantastic. They're like all curvy and the beautiful thing is that the teal is actually slip covers that come off and can be laundered. Like how great is that, right? Um, they do kind of like get slippy, slidey all over the couch, like it's hard to keep them in place, but still, I'll take that any day. And you can see the bikes back there. Like we have fewer bikes, and I did eventually get rid of the bike rack. because there weren't enough bikes coming in and out, but my son is still a bicyclist, and now his bikes, when they're here, his other parent lives really close by, and he just goes back and forth as he wishes. But when his bikes are here, pretty much they lean up against this mural. The other thing that I will note is here's the ottoman that went with that set of big, chunky beige furniture that I bought, and I had images of like a happy, newly configured family cuddling up in, which never really materialized. But anyway, that ottoman is great because it um, it opens up and there's space in it, and I think that there's just a bunch of fabric samples in there, and then that piece of fabric that's on the top of it is a great piece of fabric that I bought to teach myself how to reupholster furniture, and that's the piece of furniture that I'm going to tackle first because it feels like it should be pretty straightforward. But that piece of fabric has been sitting on top of the ottoman exactly like that for months and months and months, and eventually I'll get to it. But anyway, the real reason I wanted to show you this was I wanted to tell you about this mural, and this is an even better image of it, maybe. Um, so this mural, the story of this mural is that it started pretty much right when we moved in, and I wanted to be painting, and I wanted to be painting really big, big canvases, and and we were so poor that I couldn't afford big canvases, and B, I didn't really have a place to put big canvases to paint, and C, I couldn't afford good paint. So I decided to start this mural, and it really, I, I don't know if you recognize the sort of, it's very indebted to several of my favorite artists, and kind of borrows from their work. One of them is, I think, obviously Pete Mondrian. Uh, if you've never seen it before, I have this um, Pete Mondrian tattoo. I'm a big fan of Pete Mondrian, largely because my mother was Dutch and Pete Mondrian was Dutch, and we have a little bit of a Pete Mondrian prejudice in my family. Um, so the the yellow and red checked stripes are sort of an homage to Pete Mondrian's famous painting called Broadway Boogie Woogie. Um, and the red circle with the blue stripe in it is a sort of homage to the London Underground, because my daughter spent quite a bit of time when she was in college in London, and it's one of her very favorite places. And my husband and I went to visit her in London right after we were married. It wasn't exactly a honeymoon, but I kind of like to think that I honeymooned in London. So that was sort of an homage to that. Uh, the the sort of rainbow semicircle is an homage to Alma Thomas, who was a member of the Washington Color School and is just a huge inspiration to me. And I had just recently discovered her work in an exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art that was dedicated to a mid-century American, I think it was American, but anyway, mid-century women artists. Um, and the stripes over there on the left. Oh, and I should say that all of this paint is so I wanted a big canvas, and I thought I can't afford a big canvas, and even if I could, where would I put it? So I'm just going to do it on the wall. But again, the paint is all house paint, and it was either you can get little samples for like $5 or $10, or you can get returns from the return table for usually between $5 and $10, even for whole gallons. And so that's what I had to work with. And the stripes are a little homage to Jean Davis, who is another member of the Washington Color School, whose work I love. And one of the things that's kind of funny about those stripes is that they're really pretty imprecise, and it kind of bothers me, and I've thought about going over them. And the reason that they were imprecise is because literally when I was making them, I only had enough painter's tape to like span like one. I had to keep reusing the same piece of painter's tape because I couldn't afford to buy a new roll of painter's tape at that moment. Like, we probably could have bought a new roll the next month, but I was so impatient to get it done and I couldn't afford to buy a new roll of painter's tape. So I just kept reusing the same roll of painter's tape. And the stripes are, if you go and look closely, they're very imprecise and very wibbly wobbly. But I kind of like that now. Um, and then the rest of the mural is basically newspaper decoupage of the Philadelphia skyline, which I love. It's a beautiful skyline, and it's a very postmodern architecture skyline, which is a design style that I'm very uh, inclined to. And my husband, Joel, was a newspaper man for 35 years, so that's kind of an homage to my city and to him. Um, and that mural happened over the course of a couple of years, honestly. And at one point, it was sort of semi-finished, and I almost was going to just paint it over. Uh, and I thought, when I think it was when I had a little bit more money, and I thought, oh, now I could actually buy canvases, but then where would I hang them? Because there's no wall space to hang them on. So maybe I'll just paint over what I had done of the mural in white, sort of museum white, and use that to hang my canvases. But when I told my son that I was thinking about painting over the unfinished mural, he was like, Mom, you can't. My friends love your mural. You have to keep it there. So that gave me the inspiration to finish it. And there it is, uh, the story of my mural. And it does actually give me a lot of happiness. Uh, in general, my style is very maximalist, and I like lots of bright, saturated colors. Like, those are the things that make me happy. So that mural wouldn't work for lots of people, especially with our sort of neurodivergent sensitivities, but it works beautifully for me. So, let's see. I'm going to go back to the comments now. The uh, Rena said, "I love the mural. The bikes feel like part of it." I have to say that very much is the case for me too, because that's always been covered with bikes. So I'm not sure what I would do if there weren't bikes in my downstairs space, and especially leaning against that mural. Um, I'm going to go up from the bottom. Uh, let's see. Regan says, as a last question, is there a change you made specifically to make things easier for your neurodivergence, or did you not think of it that way until recently? What helped improved? That's a great question, and I would say that um, that there were a few sorts of changes that I made, maybe related specifically to neurodivergence, but that is really a more recent thought. I mean, I've been thinking it before I discovered this concept of deaf space, and deaf space just kind of exploded the idea in my mind, but I wasn't specifically thinking um, about that too much downstairs when I was designing that space. Although I will say that, like, my desire to make art, and like, I am a completely self-taught artist. I don't think of myself as somebody who is especially talented as a visual artist. It's something very new in my life. I didn't start making visual art at all until just a couple of years ago. I have no ambitions at all to sell or show my artwork. So in some ways, um, a lot of people might think of devoting so much space to an art studio as being kind of entitled or something, right? But I do feel like artistic expression is kind of imperative for me as a neurodivergent person. So in that way, I guess, sort of deciding to devote so much space to something that feels like a need for me as a neurodivergent person was part of the design. But other than that, I would say that the main way that that space and other spaces, and including here in this room, um, sort of is the design nods to neurodivergent accessibility is the open shelving and the open cubbies. Like I've become a huge fan of that um, because I have, as many neurodivergent people do, a real out of sight, out of mind kind of phenomenon happening, and especially with art supplies. So even like all the fabric that I have in that ottoman, I forget all about it. So for me to be able to have my supplies visible to me all the time makes a huge difference. Uh, and and fortunately for me as a neurodivergent person, I don't feel overwhelmed by the visual clutter of it as long as it's sort of tucked in neatly into open shelves and open cubbies in a way that um, isn't too cluttered and crowded. So I'm a big fan also of everything in its place and a place for everything. Um, that really works for me. I think that that's because I feel like I do appreciate and love a sort of maximalist aesthetic. And so I like a lived in look. I don't like an over styled. Like I like it fine in a magazine spread or even in somebody else's house, like a super styled space. Again, I can, as I think I said before, I can really appreciate aesthetically that kind of, um, like surfaces that are clutter free and that, where the objects that are on them have been thoughtfully chosen and put together in ways that are pleasing. I get all that, but it's not really how I can live, um, and not even how I need to live. So I guess that's a sort of rambly um, answer to your question, but it is something that I want to think even more about. And I think that maybe even more than deaf space would be for deaf people, the 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 specific solutions, the specific design ideas that are going to accommodate neurodivergent people are going to be wildly different based on who the neurodivergent person is and their specific sensibilities. Um, but I still think that the principle of it is so fascinating, and that's why I really want to sit down with neurodivergent people and talk more about it. Um, Yeah, Broomhead says, I'm so glad I'm not the only one who likes lots of color on the walls, not just pure white walls everywhere. Yeah, I'm with you. And like I said, it's kind of distressing to me the trend to warm neutrals now. Everybody's talking about warm neutrals in the design space. And basically, what that means is beige is back. Gray is out, beige is back. And I'm just like, no, thank you. There's a British designer who I just love. And if you like and who I'm enormously influenced by aesthetically. And her name is Sophie Robinson, and her Instagram is Sophie Robinson Interiors, I think. Uh, I've followed her very closely for a long time and have been enormously influenced by her. And she actually has some great. If you're into that sort of maximalist style and you like lots of color and you like lots of texture and lots of patterns and clashing patterns, if that's aesthetically appealing to you, and I know for some people like that actually just creates like overstimulation. But anyway, if you like all of that, Sophie's Instagram is one you should definitely follow, and she's also just lovely and charming and British. um, but she also has some interior design courses that she sells that are quite good. That are not cheap, but they're quite worth the money, I think, if you're looking for insights about how to do all that, how to make it work, and how to make it not just be a hot mess. I've only bought one of them, but I loved it. Let's see. Yamuna says, my family is trying to force me to paint everything white. Why? Oh, I'm sorry about that. Yeah. We do get pressures from all over, don't we? But yeah. I mean, yeah. Go look at Sophie Robinson's Instagram and you'll be inspired, Yamuna. Kitty Litter Zen Garden. Hi. Nice to see you again. Says, this gives my Ferrari brain pause for thought as I've been trying to get through my daily to-do list and creative time with the accessibility of my space lacking. Yeah. I think that often in sort of alternative spaces, progressive spaces, political spaces, as many of us, excuse me, sorry, I just need to blow my nose. As many of us inhabit, and I'm all of those things, political, progressive, all of it, we tend to sort of disparage like interior design as being kind of, I don't know, trendy and trite and silly. It's like not serious. Like it's interior design is not going to like bring on the revolution, right? But I actually disagree because and it's especially true now that we spend so much of our time inside our homes. For those of us who are now working from home, um, like our spaces, that's everything. Like if we don't have spaces that work for us, um, that are designed around our specific needs, then we're more disabled than we need to be, right? So I'm just a huge believer in paying a lot of attention, taking seriously um, our interior spaces. Uh, yeah, Regan says, the creative boom on the internet has made a lot of good things happen, but it also accidentally puts pressure on people to monetize all of their hobbies. Right. Yeah, yeah. In reference to my comment about my artwork. I agree with that so much. And I I do believe that the potential to monetize our art and our creativity has a lot of possibility for disabled people, but I also agree that there is so much pressure to monetize that we can sort of feel like the work that the creative work that we do that isn't monetizable doesn't have value, and it absolutely does. I do want to just say about Sophie is that she's pretty mainstream. Like she's a pretty mainstream. Well, actually, she's married to this kind of radical environmentalist. I think that she's maybe a little bit less mainstream than she comes off as. But anyway, I just love her to death. There's a British show called um, the Great British Interior Design Challenge or something like that that was on years ago, and it's one of those like they bring a bunch of amateur designers together and give them challenges and vote one of them off each week kind of shows. But it's also in the way that those British shows are always so much kinder and gentler than the American versions of them. It's all very lovely and calm and anyway, that's where I discovered her, and that show is actually interesting because it not only has that component to it, but there's also sort of this education component where they have a guy who's like an academic, I think, who does like sort of the history of architecture and talks like in each of the show episodes they talk about the architecture and the history of the architecture and the history of the design movement. Like, so if you're interested in that kind of history of architecture and design, it's a great little show. And I wish I could remember the exact name of it, but it's something like British Interior Design Show, the Great British Interior Design Show, or something like that. Sophie Robinson is one of the one of the judges. All right. It looks like I'm at the end of the comments, and also we're at an hour and a half, which is I hope someday to limit myself to hour-long live streams, but it's fun to ramble on at the end and interact with your comments. Thank you all so much for being here, and if you are interested in having further conversations about these kinds of things, as I said, we do have in the Divergent Design Studios community on Mighty Networks, we have an interior and garden design lab and a bunch of interesting people who are interested in all of these issues. And we have a bi-weekly, every other week on Monday nights support group for that lab. So um, yeah, come join us. There's lots of sliding scale options if $20 a month is outside of your budget right now, and if the lowest one is $5 a month, and if even that is outside of your budget, please email me at marta@martarose.com, and I will send you a link to a free plan until you're in a different financial position, because I want the space to be accessible. I do charge because it's how I make my living. But I'm committed to financial accessibility. So, yes, thank you all. And we'll talk soon. Oh, the last thing I should say is that next week I'm going to do the live that was originally scheduled for last week about the neurodiversity paradigm, drawing from some of the work of my friend Jess Meadows, who you may know as Queer Vengeance on Instagram. And actually, it turns out that it was great that I had to cancel last week, because Jess is going to be actually available to come and be my first interviewee, or we're going to have a conversation. I think that I'm going to have figured out the technology of it by then. And we have a kind of exciting big announcement. So come back next week, meet Jess, and let's talk about the neurodiversity paradigm. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye.